a Chinese sci-fi book from the 1930s set on Mars about cat people. That sounds like it would be an answer to a Mad Libs question, but it is actually a brief summary of the book we're discussing today, Cat Country by Lao She. Cat Country is a interesting book. It's one of the more interesting or unique sci-fi books I have read. I want to preface that by saying I've not read a lot of sci-fi books. Most of my sci-fi reading is actually early to mid 20th century sci-fi books. So stuff like The Time Machine, War of the Worlds, Cat Country. Those are the kind of sci-fi books I have read. And Cat Country is very much a sci-fi book of its time, but to be a sci-fi book about astronauts from a Chinese perspective in the 1930s, that's pretty interesting to me. I want to preface this by saying that Cat Country wasn't actually really well received. Even so, Lao She himself was a bit underwhelmed by the book. Cat Country is supposedly, well, it's not just supposedly, it is a satirical commentary on the political status of China at the time. Obviously, in the early 30s and late 20s, China was going through a lot of stuff at the time. The Japanese were continuously attacking them. There was fights and wars between the Nationalist Party and the Communist Party. And Lao She is really writing about that political division in China at the time. His own criticism of the book, and the criticism that most critics have of this book, is that it's meant to be a satirical book, but it's not super funny. And me reading this book, and the translation is very good, I kind of get that. It's not overly funny. There are witty points, there are witty observations by the narrator, who is a Chinese astronaut who has landed on Mars in Cat Country. And yes, it's witty at points, but it never comes across as funny. There's definitely the commentary side of satire there. Lao She nails that, and you can definitely tell if you've got some basic knowledge of Chinese history, which I have a basic knowledge of Chinese history before the 1940s. Yeah, you kind of get that he is commentating on China at the time, but it's not super funny. And again, this might be it being lost in translation. However, even Chinese critics are sort of remarking it's good commentary, but it's not funny. And I think Lao She himself even acknowledged that in his own lifetime. My one main gripe with this specific copy of Lao She's Cat Country is that the intro is extremely scathing of communism, albeit contextually in Lao She's time, he was actually going to be arrested and killed, but he killed himself as a counter-revolutionary. At the very least, that's how this book puts it across. You know, xenophobia is something, but there is some truth to it, most likely. But the intro to this book very much paints this book as a scathing, just commentary on communist China. But at the time, China wasn't a communist country. It was 1933 when this book came out, and China was actually like partly supporting communism, partly supporting the KMT, which was a more nationalist party. So the introduction isn't the best. And I feel like the introduction maybe takes away from reading the book, especially if you don't know anything about Chinese history. Like, I read that introduction, and throughout it I was like, yes, a criticism of communism. But then I'm also considering this book isn't really set in that time. Obviously, there's going to be some commentary on that, and most critics agree that the commentary of Chinese society as a whole does criticize the KMT and the Communist Party at the time, discussing things like the politics of the cat people, which are called brawls in the book. And discussing the cat people, let's talk more about the characters in this, because it kind of does reflect Lao She's thoughts on China as a society at the time. I will be avoiding spoilers. I will maybe discuss things about the cat people, but I promise there won't be any major plot spoilers, because I do want you to go out and read this book. So the cat people, what's their deal? Well, they're cat people. It's kind of, they're cats. However, they are a specific type of cats. So on Mars, there are lots of people who are cats. However, specifically, Cat Country is a country, nation on Mars of cat people, and they call themselves cat people. It's a bit confusing because there are other cats, but they call them foreigners. We'll get into that. So the cat people run the society that is kind of backwards to the perspective of our narrator. He is looking at it, and there are discussions of how, I'll call them women, but they're cat women, how women are treated, how education is treated, how history is treated, about gluttony, things about politics and political takeovers of the country. It's meant to reflect Lao She's interpretation of China at the time, which in itself was going through a political upheaval in the late 20s to the 30s. And it is just a lot at once, and I feel like the cat people are portrayed so negatively. You kind of get this feeling that Lao She doesn't really care for the Chinese people. But that is an initial interpretation. I think a better interpretation is that the cat people, in many different ways, have experienced what China are experiencing. For one thing, the cat people so admire the foreign cats, which is kind of in line with China in the 20s to 30s, that although it might not be admiration, but foreign powers, it being the Portuguese or the British or the French or the Japanese or the Russians, have all come to China and tried to influence China, whether it be through force or through economics or through trade. You kind of see all three in Cat Country. And it kind of shows the relationship of the cat people or the Chinese people with foreigners. You also see how politics is being sorted out mostly physically in Cat Country, which is kind of what China was going through in the 30s and the late 20s, because there was fighting between the two factions in the country, the KMT, so the Nationalist Taiwanese Party, and the Communist Party. So it does reflect China at the time. But also it kind of goes a little bit further than that, and that's where I feel like the introduction goes wrong, where this isn't entirely a spoiler, but in Cat Country, university diplomas are just given out on the day. People join school, they join university, and they get the diploma straight away, and then the cat people, are very lazy. The introduction kind of relates that to communism, which doesn't really make sense, and again, when I was reading the book, it kind of made it feel like I was questioning the introduction instead of the book. So, if you pick up this Penguin copy of the book, skip the introduction. It gives you some stuff about Lao She's life, but other than that, it kind of ruins the experience for me, frankly. Going further than that, And a key part of this book are things called revy leaves. Revy leaves are basically the sustenance of the cat people, and it is their main mode of production. They basically only deal in revy leaves. They have a currency, but the revy leaves are seen as more important than their own currency. And the revy leaves are something that the cat people are basically addicted to. And it's almost as if the revy leaves are used as a way to indoctrinate the cat people and keep them kind of lazy. And again, I'm looking at the introduction of this specific version of Cat Country, and the introduction was saying, well, the revy leaves are basically communism. And I'm just like, this book is set in the 1930s of China. That's not something that should be used as an analysis of this book. I kind of am analysing it as the most typical dystopian / utopian ideas. Aldous Huxley kind of does this in A Brave New World, where the people are being controlled by a drug. It's the same kind of thing with the revy leaves in Cat Country. It's just a way of looking at a dystopian society and criticizing it and saying, okay, this is a way to keep people down. I'll give the introduction something. There is some talk of a pseudo-communist regime in Cat Country, but it kind of is more criticism of Russia than it is of China, which again kind of goes against the introduction, where it's very much talking about China and not Russian communism, because the two are slightly different. If you studied history, you would kind of know that, but the lowdown, the two are slightly different to one another. So I kind of rambled about a lot of things there, and that's because this book is that. A lot of things happen, there's a lot of talking about a lot of things, and then something happens at the end, and that's it. Again, like I said, critics and Lao She himself was like, this isn't my best work. And I'll be honest, I don't think it's the best work either. I wish I'd read one of his other books. Rickshaw Boy apparently is meant to be one of his best books ever written. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read Rickshaw Boy. I wish I'd maybe started on something like that and then gone to Cat Country, because Cat Country was kind of the most middle of the road kind of book I would give it. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. If I could give it half stars, I'd maybe give it 2.5, because it is a very middle of the road book. But it is still a very interesting insight into the state of sci-fi writing, and this book is a sci-fi book, if you think about it, although it's not supposed to be a sci-fi book. It's a sci-fi book, and also it kind of gives you an insight into Lao She's ideas on China, because also Lao She with some more context with his life, because if you're going to be reading a new author, it's nice to have some context on his life. He is actually from a minority group in China, which the introduction does get kind of right, where that might kind of influence his ideas on China. But I would say read Cat Country. If you're going to get the specific version I got, maybe ignore the introduction or just read the first half of the introduction, which is the about the author, and then kind of skip the rest of it, read the book, then go back and read the introduction. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this analysis of a strange book. The first sci-fi book I believe we've reviewed here on this channel. Let me know in the comments down below if you are interested in reading Cat Country. Have you read Cat Country, or have you read any of Lao She's books? I'd be very interested to know. Remember to like, subscribe, share the video with a friend or family member, and remember, go and read a great book today.